How are you, mate?
Hello, I'm doing pretty well.
Excellent. And one of our far-flung, can I call him sons? I don't know. Shatish.
Hi, everyone.
Long time no here. Glad to have you with us.
Glad to be back, of course.
We are broadcasting live from the Allan Carswell Observatory, located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. This is Monday night. It is therefore Astronomy Night in Canada, where the lineup is entirely Canadian, starting with ourselves, York Universe, on to Western Worlds, Quirks and Quarks, not to mention Science for the People. York Universe broadcasts every Monday night at 9 p.m. local Toronto time. And that, of course, is Tuesday morning, 1 a.m. Universal Coordinated Time at this time of the year. The York Universe production works in concert with our online public viewing program run by the Observatory team. Hi there, team. And, of course, not surprisingly, it runs at exactly the same time as we are on air from 9 till 10 p.m. local Toronto time. By all means, point your favorite web browser to observatory.info.yorku.ca and follow the links to OPV, online public viewing, and join the conversation. It is also available to you on YouTube, so by all means, jump into YouTube if you prefer and just do a search for Allan Carswell Observatory and join the live stream. Our broadcast is powered by and is in partnership with Astronomy.fm, the voice of astronomy. If you've got any questions or comments about past shows or suggestions for future topics, by all means, send us an email at observe@yorku.ca. You can always connect with us on Twitter or Instagram with the handle @York Observatory and on Facebook @Allan I. Carswell OBS. All of our programs are free, but if you would like to make a donation, by all means, check out our website, observatory.info.yorku.ca. We will be monitoring the chat room for questions and posting content, but in the meantime, gentlemen, how are you on this really foggy, smoky evening here in Toronto? We've got bushfires and smoke. Well, the bushfires aren't too close, but the smoke is everywhere.
Yeah, definitely want to avoid going outside at the moment.
Yeah, not real swift. I dare say in Vancouver, you're probably fine there, Shatish.
Absolutely fine, to be honest. And well, I shouldn't be rubbing it in, but yeah, it's a pretty good day actually here on the West Coast.
That's all right. Occasionally, the outback of British Columbia runs into its own difficulties, but I'm glad to hear that no fires are raging there. But it certainly is messing up observing. It's meant to be clear tonight, and technically it is clear. There's no clouds in the sky, but there's a lot of smoke. So there will not be any live imagery from the 1 meter telescope tonight. Sorry, guys. And Connie, you were saying you were at a conference last week.
I was, yes. I realized we were just talking about this before the show started, but this was actually a different one than the one I was talking about the last time I was on. That one's in November. This was a conference just for graduate students studying the moon.
Ah, very good. Was this hosted by a Canadian group or a U.S. group, NASA?
This was a U.S. group, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, people from all over the world.
Very good, very good. Probably even a few from the moon. Who knows? But you were just a participant. You didn't actually give a presentation this time around?
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent, excellent. And was this your first conference as a grad student?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I presented at the Physics Executive Graduate Conference here at York, but I don't really know if that counts.
It does. It's
a departmental thing.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's a good warm-up, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
Very good indeed. Very good indeed. And Shatish, have you been outside observing or just inside hitting the books?
I've been outside a lot, but not observing, and I've been outside.
Doesn't count then. Doesn't count. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
You got me.
But you have been inside sort of catching up on things.
I'm actually trying to catch up on things that I'm not even supposed to catch up on, so I guess you know the context, but yeah. Yes,
true. Hey, it's summertime, you know, you can be sort of doing things and not doing things at the same time, and nobody minds because it's summer.
Okay, that's not what I meant, but it's okay. No worries.
All right, gentlemen, let's get underway because we've got all sorts of good stuff that we want to pass on. Satish, do you want to lead us off this evening, please?
Pleasure, sir. So we'll start today with talking about July 22nd or 23rd. I'm not too sure at this moment, but this was the launch of the Soyuz TM3 in 1987. So for those who really haven't ever gotten into this was the third crewed spacecraft to Mir space station. Mir was the one which used to hang up there when they were Soviet Union, and those were the early years. So anyway, so the crew included Alexander Alexandrov, who was to replace a long-duration crew member whose name also was Alexander, last name Layakin. And well, actually, he was diagnosed with heart problems and he had to return to Earth. And then, okay, there's another Alexander, Viktorenko, and the Syrian cosmonaut Mohammad Faris. These were the people who actually were on a one-week mission. Faris was the first Syrian to visit space. He was selected for the space flight in 1985, and he just spent like maybe a week or 8 days in space. He took out photos from space, of Syria, to be specific, and he did experiments in space. He also brought the first recorded soil from Earth into space, which was the Damascus soil, if I may say so. It was a vial of dirt from Damascus. And then he returned to the Syrian Air Force after his space flight, after which he actually defected from the Assad regime in 2012, since Syria had been in a civil war, or has been in a civil war. And then he became a refugee in Turkey. So for those of you who want to get to know more about him, there is an article on the Guardian.com website, so to say.
Well, of course, the good news there is that he was, in fact, the first Syrian who made it to orbit. When we blend, unfortunately, politics with everything else, it becomes a slightly more challenging story, shall we say. But nonetheless, from the perspective of Syria participating with the Soviet Union, because it still was the Soviet Union at that point in time, he was their first representative in space. The Mir space station, the predecessor, of course, to the ISS, really was quite the workhorse. It was home to many, many differing crews across many differing nations. I think there was like a total of 9 differing space shuttle missions, for example, that ended up docking with Mir. It was, whichever way you want to cut it, a really big success as far as space stations are concerned. And it was successfully deorbited. I guess it was around about 2001. 2001 was it? I was going to say in the early 2000s. I can't actually remember when it was deorbited, but it was a good example of a safe, successful deorbit into the South Pacific. It's always sad when you see, a vehicle of such great repute end up in the ocean, but at least it was a controlled re-entry. And given, for example, Skylab, not to mention the Chinese space stations coming down to Tiangong, not quite so controlled, it was good to see Mir was, successfully deorbited.
And I think it was in orbit for almost 10 years.
I think it was even longer than that. I think it was closer to 14 years. It was in orbit for a long time.
Oh, yes. That's, yeah. Correction.
Yeah. That's okay. That's okay. I mean, that was one aspect of the Soviet space program that was very, very successful. They had a number of Salyut space stations that remained in orbit from the late 70s through the 80s, then Mir, up until the full commissioning of the ISS. By contrast, NASA never got into the space station game after Skylab until ISS. So there was sort of a hiatus there of, give or take a bit, 25 years between successful US-based space stations. By contrast, the Soviet Union has had a space station presence more or less continuously since the late 1970s. And of course, now China is getting into the space station game. They've had 3 space stations, all told. And at the moment, they've got one in orbit that is occupied by 3 tachonauts. So, yeah, lots and lots of space station activity over the decades.
So we now have had at least 40 years of continuous space station presence.
Yeah, pretty well. And, in fact, if you go back to when Skylab itself was launched and in operation, that was 1973. So we're coming up on, 48 years, basically, of space station history. But Skylab was only operational for a year, 1973, and then fell into Australia's outback in 1979. But we won't talk about that tonight. Connor, I believe you've got a happy birthday shout-out.
I do. This is a happy birthday shout-out to Vera Rubin, who was born on July 23rd, 1928. So though she developed an interest in astronomy at a young age, Rubin encountered much resistance on the path to becoming a professional astronomer. During high school, one of her science teachers actually advised her to avoid science entirely and study art instead. However, she obviously did not follow that advice and instead applied to a master's program in astronomy at Princeton, where she was promptly rejected because Princeton would not allow women to study astronomy at a graduate level until 1975. She later turned down an offer from Harvard to study at Cornell, where her husband was also attending graduate school. Sexism continued to plague her throughout her graduate career, including the fact that she was actually not allowed to meet with her advisor in his office, as it was located in a men-only portion of the university. In 1965, she became the first woman to observe at the Palomar Observatory, where she had to create her own women's restroom, as the observatory only had facilities for men. A lot of her early work in the motion of galaxies was considered highly controversial at the time, though in the years since, it has largely been shown to be correct. The fact that her research was constantly the subject of so much controversy, unsurprisingly, proved to be a bit unpleasant and tiring for her. So she decided to move into the supposedly more benign field of galaxy rotation curves. Unfortunately for her wish to avoid further controversy, she actually found that objects near the edge of galaxies were moving as fast as those near the center, rather than decreasing in speed with distance as had been expected. And when combined with her observations that galaxies were not quite moving in the directions that one would expect based on their visible matter content, these results provided some of the first direct evidence for the existence of dark matter. Now, though Rubin died in 2016, she left behind a legacy in astronomy that is hard to deny. In 2019, it was announced that the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, an 8.4-meter telescope currently under construction in Chile, designed to study dark matter, would be renamed the Vera C. Rubin Observatory in her honor, making her the first woman to have a large observatory named after her.
I could quip too little too late, but at least it is a wonderful tip of the hat to an outstanding astronomer. And the story of Vera Rubin's exploits and the challenges she faced never cease to amaze me. I mean, we're talking about such, sexism, such hostility towards one of our colleagues that lived in my time, and that really, really is a sad state of affairs. She was featured prominently in one of Carl Sagan's Cosmos episodes. This was the original series back in the late 70s, and it really portrayed her science in a wonderful light. And many, many people, I think, were introduced to her through the Cosmos series. And of course, since then, as you say, the outstanding observations that she was able to make, the determinations of, as you say, galactic rotation curves, but her work on galaxy distributions in general, just, wonderful stuff. And she never received the credit that I think was due to her in those early years. I think, there was an effort made to make up for that in her final decades, but as I say, in a way, too little too late.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've read that some of her colleagues had felt that she probably should have received the Nobel Prize for all the various discoveries she had made over the years.
It's very true. I mean, the Nobel Prizes, their awarding sometimes is a little fickle, let me be polite, and a little hard to follow. And why she didn't receive a Nobel Prize in astronomy is a little hard to understand, but there are many worthy candidates. We'll go down that pathway, and everybody who does receive a Nobel Prize in physics and in any of the categories is, generally speaking, worthy of them. But she certainly was a candidate, and whether or not she was precluded from such an award because of her gender, I don't. There's been lots written about it, and I don't know enough to formulate an opinion. But she certainly was a worthy candidate, and it is a sad statement that she didn't receive it. But the Large Synoptic Telescope being named after her, that really is a nice touch. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously the state of women in astronomy is much better than it was at that time. But I mean, I know from personal experience and the things that I saw, in undergrad, where I had a physics professor who actually would grade his female students more harshly than his male students, just because he felt that women didn't have a place in physics. So obviously there's still work to be done.
I was going to say, and we're now talking the 21st century here. I mean, that was only literally, without putting fingers on it, Connor, 2, 3, 4 years ago at the most.
Yeah.
I mean, that is nothing short of reprehensible. And we'll talk a little bit more about that aspect of it when we talk about women astronauts a little later on tonight. But yeah, it's hard to believe that those sorts of attitudes existed at all and persist to today. Not good. As you say, more work to be done. Okay, taking us back to July 20th, 1969. And anybody who needs prompting about what that important date is, well, we should go and talk over coffee somewhere, because really, that is one of the quintessential dates as far as human spaceflight is concerned. And without any further ado, it is the date upon which humans first walked upon the surface of the moon. It was Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin who set down into the Sea of Tranquility on the moon back, 52 years ago now. And yes, we haven't been back to the moon with people yet, but we're working hard to change that. They landed with the lunar module Eagle on the surface, while Michael Collins orbited in Columbia in the command module above the moon. It was an exciting climax to a decade of frantic exploration that started back with the flight of Yuri Gagarin on April 12th, 1961, and a couple of months later resulted in President John Kennedy, committing the U.S. to landing a man on the moon. Yes, I know it was a man on the moon, but that's a quote, by the end of the decade. And that's exactly what happened with the flight of Apollo 11. They did set foot upon the moon by the end of the decade, essentially winning the space race, the fabled space race between the Soviet Union and NASA. The astronauts landed on the moon. Very exciting stuff. Many accounts of the descent to the moon by Eagle and the last moment Armstrong wrestling control away from the autopilot that was taking them down into a field of boulders, and literally gently flying around the surface of the moon with fuel running out, trying to find a nice safe spot to land. And they landed with nearly 30 seconds of fuel in reserve. Yeah, definitely a little nerve-wracking there. And the famous quote from Armstrong, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed, and the folks from Mission Control basically copying that transmission, indicating that there were a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. It really was exciting stuff. The sort of thing that you would expect out of Hollywood, except this really was real life stuff. They were on the moon for about 21 and a half hours, not long when all is said and done. They exited the lunar module about 6 hours after landing. It took them a little longer to get out than they had thought. All the training on Earth didn't seem to prepare them for the actual disarray that the lunar module and the cramped quarters of the lunar module were in. But nonetheless, they got out. Wandered around the moon, picked up a lot of moon rocks, took a lot of flashy photographs, deployed the US flag, of course, and so on. But as I said, only 21 hours on the moon. Of course, the famous statement that Armstrong made as he set foot upon the lunar surface, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. That fabled letter A that was missing, one small step for a man. Literally 40 years of controversy over that. Did he say it? Did he not? Was there static that took it out? Did he slur or blur the words together? In 2010, Armstrong basically said, yeah, I blew it. And, you know, given the fact that there was a couple of billion people hanging on his every word and they'd just flown to the surface of the moon for the first time, yeah, I'm personally prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, you know, he flubbed one word. Get over it. I mean, yeah. Anyway, he had a great time on the surface of the moon. They took off, headed back into space, rejoined Mike Collins, and returned safely to the Earth. It was a pretty quick mission, but it paved the way for 5 more lunar landings, which each of them got increasingly more complex and more successful. By the time we got to Apollo 17, we were actually sending scientists to the moon. Harrison Schmitt was a geologist, the only scientist to fly to the moon. A couple of interesting little things. They left behind a whole series of memorabilia on the lunar surface, including the Apollo 1 mission patch. That was the mission, of course, that ended in disaster on the ground. It was a test of the Apollo capsule, and it resulted in the Apollo fire of January 67 and the loss of Grissom, White, and Chaffee. So memorabilia on the lunar surface has that mission patch. Also, the 2 cosmonauts, Yuri Gagarin and Vladimir Kamarov, the 2 cosmonauts who died during the 60s, Kamarov during re-entry, Gagarin during a training flight, actually, their insignias were left on the lunar surface as well. So a nice touch in that regard. Of course, a few presidential speeches on a CD and things like that. But yeah, there was also, of course, a lot of imagery that was transmitted down. I remember, yes, I'm that old. I remember watching Armstrong and Aldrin clamber down the lunar module onto the lunar surface. It was grainy, really, really grainy, black and white, very low contrast. You really had to squint, and my eyesight's not the best at the first place. But nonetheless, all of that imagery was being routed through the Parkes radio telescope in Australia. Yes, I had to get Australia in there. And then bounced onto the Honeysuckle Creek tracking station just outside of Canberra before it was sent around the world to an audience that was estimated to be in excess of 600 million people watching the exploit. So really exciting stuff. Now, having said all that, would you believe we didn't manage to keep safe those original transmissions? There have been many, many copies made of the original transmissions, but the original tapes that recorded that fabled moment got lost. And we believe that they were actually overwritten because NASA was sort of cutting corners and they wanted to recycle their magnetic tapes. Somebody didn't label the magnetic tape first moon landing and they overwrote them. So, you know, message to the wise: when you're recording data, record it 2 or 3 times and please label it appropriately. Anyway, July 20th, 1969, the landing of Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon.
So
Yeah,
go ahead.
just, you know, probably a bit of a motivating factor there behind why NASA has a much more robust data archiving system in place now.
You think? Yeah, they copped a lot of flack for losing those moon tapes. I can't believe it. To this day, I can't. And they've had like 2 congressional inquiries chasing down. I mean, they never fingered anybody in particular, but as you say, they've got a much more robust system in place, and it really is important. I mean, the moon tapes were not the only data that they didn't keep. The original, and you're going to be talking about this shortly, the original Viking 1 landing data, science data, was never kept either. And that was, in the 70s. So unfortunately, there was a period of time there where NASA was playing far too fast and loose with historical data. Much better now, but oh gosh, those early days of the space program, not good.
So a couple of wise comments on this. So the 30-second fuel left, of course, is something even I didn't remember. So thanks for pointing that out. And about his comments, the fact that the person was literally on the moon, I think people should really drop it as to what he actually said, what he spelled out.
Yeah, I mean, according to the man himself, and you can't get much better than the person who actually said it, he wanted to say 1 small step for a man and 1 giant leap for mankind. But he forgot the A, or he just, we all make those sorts of speaking errors, and we're only talking to crowds of 10, 20, or a few hundred, let alone 600 million, with the weight of history looking down over your shoulder. You've just landed on the moon, you've just struggled out of the lunar module, you've just made it to the surface, and you forget A. Well, okay, fine. As I say, live with it.
They didn't have Google then. They didn't have a translator or anything of that.
No, not at all. They didn't even have a good camera, unfortunately. Anyway, a really important day. I remember it ever so clearly. In Australia, it was the middle of the day. Here in North America, it was late at night. It was meant to be primetime TV, but as I said, they took a little longer to get out of the lunar module than originally was expected. But from Australia's point of view, it was the middle of the day. Oh, it was perfect. I even got out of school. I mean, the entire school was just watching it. My mother brought a television and sat it at the front of the classroom, and we all were just glued to it. It was great.
Wow.
Yeah. Shatish, you want to talk about a comet, I'm told.
Yes, so this is like inhuman, or like non-human. There was a pun intended, but didn't come out well. So July 23rd, 1990, we would touch upon the discovery of comet Hale-Bopp. It was discovered by Allan Hale, hence the name Hale, and Thomas Bopp, hence the name Bopp. So the comet was visible by the naked eye in May 1996. Well, actually, yes, yeah. So it was discovered back in 1990. It became a naked eye object for all of us to see without a telescope in 1996. It reached a maximum magnitude of 1.8, and this was in April of 1997, the 1st of April. It was visible to the naked eye for around 18 months, which was twice as long as the Great Comet of 1811, when none of us was born. But it still is the previous record holder. So Hale was actually observing this from his driveway in New Mexico, and he'd been searching for comets unsuccessfully till the point he discovered this particular piece of astronomy object. The magnitude 10.5 globular cluster, or new globular cluster M70, he was probably trying to watch that, and he realized that it was new after trying to identify it on the star maps, and he emailed the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams. Okay, so Bob was a friend's telescope in Arizona, and he also realized it was new by looking at star maps. So Bob also sent an actual telegram to the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams. At the time of the discovery, it was 7.2 astronomical units from the sun. So usually comets show no discernible activity at that distance, but Hale-Bopp already had an observable coma. These were the early days for the internet, and the new technology played a role in public interest in the comet. Wow, okay. So around perihelion, it was brighter than any star except Sirius. The dust tail stretched 40 to 45 degrees on the sky. It was visible before full darkness, and the last time it was viewable by the naked eye was the reported time was December 1997. And before that, the previous perihelion for this comet was likely in 2215 BC, and it is believed that it may have been observed in ancient Egypt, where there is a text in the pyramid of Pharaoh Pepi II at Saqqara that refers to an NHH star, well, as a companion of the pharaoh in the heavens. So, NHH is the hieroglyph for long hair, so probably this translates to long hair comet. And Hale-Bopp is supposed to make its next visit, or expected to make its next visit in 4385 AD. So you heard it right, that's around 2,200, 300 years from now, when it'll come back to the inner solar system.
I'm not going to be around.
And me, so.
Yeah, Hale-Bopp was really quite the phenomena. It was visible to the naked eye it was visible to the naked eye or small telescopes for the better part of 18 months. It really was that remarkable a comet. And certainly it generated lots of public interest. The York Observatory had it as its featured object for basically for the better part of a year on Wednesday nights. Lots and lots of people coming to watch it. And of course, it was only a year after Comet Hyakutake, which had come through in 1996. So we had 2 years in a row with naked eye comets blazing across the sky. Hale-Bopp wasn't moving as quick as Hyakutake, but it certainly was far more persistent. Hyakutake was sort of visible only for about, give or take a bit, 3 months, whereas Hale-Bopp just kept on keeping on. So it was really the great comet of 97 and was arguably one of the great comets of the 20th century.
Yeah, I unfortunately just barely missed it. Was born in November of 1997.
You're a cometary kid. We can go with that, all right?
Well, you didn't actually miss it. He came down just in time. He was there till December, so. Anyways, sorry. Go ahead.
Comets like this, though, are certainly well worth watching. I mean, there have been. Both of you probably went out and had a look at the comet of last summer, whose name now eludes me. Oh, isn't that terrible? What was the comet that Neowise?
Neowise.
Yeah, Neowise. There. I'm getting. A guy retires and forgets everything. It's terrible. So yeah. Comet Neowise, not nearly as spectacularly bright, but nonetheless was naked eye brightness wandering through our northern skies there. Hale-Bopp really was a great sight. Okay, let me bring us back to 1983, and it's a little bit of a story, somewhat similar to some of the challenges that Vera Rubin has had encountered. But I bring you back to July 25 of 1983. Svetlana Savitskaya, she completed a spacewalk. And this was the first spacewalk, the first EVA by a woman. She was the second woman in space, following on the success of Valentina Tereshkova all the way back in 1963. So the first two women in space were both Soviet women. So, chalk that up to the Soviet Union's long list of firsts. Savitskaya flew twice. Her first flight was in 1982, and she followed that up in 1983. She launched aboard the Soyuz T-12 mission to one of those space stations that I mentioned earlier, Salyut 7, and she, on that mission, executed a 3.5-hour EVA, a 3.5-hour spacewalk. Not as long as the current spacewalks, but remember, spacewalks back then were not always particularly long, and this was the first for a woman, so they were a little bit cautious. It was a materials testing exercise, actually. She was using a new tool that would not only cut metal, but also weld metal in space in preparation for some repairs that were needed to the Salyut 7 space station. So she was well, I won't say guinea pig, but she was certainly one of the first to actually prove that you could actually engage in welding activities in orbit. The mission wasn't particularly long. She deorbited on July 29th, and unfortunately didn't fly again. There were rumors that she would fly a third time. That never actually happened. So it was the two missions in 82 and 83 that represented Savitskaya's complete inventory of spaceflight. Since then, unfortunately, no other woman has walked in space from the Soviet Union or the Russian Space Federation. Several NASA women have, and only one other woman from Russia has flown since Savitskaya, and that was, what was her name? Oh, I thought I recorded it. I can't remember her name now. It's terrible. But she, oh yeah, there it is, Yelena Serova. She was aboard the Expedition 41 to the ISS, the International Space Station, in 2014. She's been the only, she has been the latest woman. There have been 4 Russian women who have flown into space. So not a very long, lengthy history. And, just playing political devil's advocate here, Valentina Tereshkova back in 1963 very deliberately was flown by the Soviet Union to make sure that they scored the first woman in space. But then they didn't fly a second woman until 20 years later, and that was, in fact, Savitskaya. Interestingly enough, the second flight of Savitskaya was 2 months before Kathy Sullivan was going to do a spacewalk. The itinerary for that STS mission was announced, and miraculously, Savitskaya launched with an EVA. So, as I say, I could play political devil's advocate and suggest that it was a little bit of a staged effort to make sure that the first EVA by a woman in space went to the Soviet Union, not to a NASA astronaut. But nonetheless, nothing to be taken away from Savitskaya. She worked very hard for her astronaut wings. She had a remarkable piloting career, actually. She holds all sorts of records for a variety of differing aircraft, so a very accomplished pilot. And her work on board both of the Soyuz missions in 82 and 83 actually helped silence a lot of the Soviet critics of women in space. Unfortunately, as I said, though, there haven't been very many women who have flown from the Soviet Union. By contrast, the US has flown in excess of 50 women in space, which is still only about 10% of their astronauts. But nonetheless, it is considerably higher percentage than the Russian Space Federation. Anyway, as I say, hats off to Savitskaya for her spacewalk July 25, 1983.
I just want to say something, like 3.5 hours of EVA, no matter what time we are in, it's still not less. Like, that's a lot of time.
Oh, absolutely. I wasn't trying to belittle it at all. No, not at all. 3.5 hours out there working hard, especially with a new instrument, a new tool, not for the faint of heart.
Yes, I'm just hailing the people, like the lady who actually did that EVA back then. It was more than what we could even imagine in those times. That's all I meant. Like, so
quite correct. I mentioned the time just because most of the ISS spacewalks that we hear about today, regardless of who is actually doing it, tend to run 6 to 7 hours. And so I wanted to make sure that people realize that 3.5, even though it was smaller, was still a great effort.
Absolutely.
Connor, do you want to finish us off, mate?
Sure. So, as mentioned a bit briefly earlier in the show, this will be July 20th of 1976 with the landing of Viking 1 on Mars. Now, Viking 1 was launched on August 20th, 1975, arriving at the Red Planet exactly 11 months later on the 70th anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing. They had actually been hoping to, target the landing for the American bicentennial on July 4th, but the launch had been delayed by a few weeks. So didn't manage that, but I would say the 70th anniversary of Apollo 11 is, a perfectly adequate substitute for that. So, so Viking 1 was the first successful Martian lander mission, which is quite impressive given the somewhat spotty record of early missions to Mars, and the fact that this was NASA's first attempt at landing on the planet. The mission consisted of 2 spacecraft, the lander itself, as well as an orbiter, which the lander would use to communicate with Earth. The landing itself was executed using a combination of a parachute and 18 rocket engines, which were designed to minimize disruption to the Martian soil. Because Viking 1 was a stationary probe that would be studying the soil at the landing site, NASA wanted to minimize disruption and potential contamination from the landing procedures. So as is the case with, basically every ground-based Martian mission, Viking 1 carried an experiment to study the possibility of life on Mars. This experiment consisted of 4 components: the pyrolytic release experiment, the labeled release experiment, the gas exchange experiment, and a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. Curiously, 3 of the components returned a negative result, while the 4th, the labeled release experiment, returned a positive detection of life. Though most scientists believe that this was a false positive, to this day, it's still not entirely clear what caused the apparent detection. So the lander operated for 2,245 sols, or Martian days, until November of 1982, a longevity record that would not be surpassed until 2010 by the Opportunity rover. As for the orbiter, it may have impacted the surface at some point, but in all likelihood, it probably remains in orbit.
Again, a very exciting mission. As you say, Connor, first to land successfully. The Soviets had put a spacecraft down on the surface, Mars 3, I think it was, and it transmitted for nearly 15 seconds and half an image. Most of us don't really count that as a success, but technically they did get to the surface first safely. But Viking was an astounding success. The imagery that it sent back, the ability of the robotic arm to dig into the soil, as you say, the variety of results from the life science measurements, everything about Viking 1 and its cousin Viking 2, 6 years worth of operation on the Martian surface. It really was a wonderful introduction to Mars exploration. And of course, like all good space probes, asked as many questions as it answered.
Yeah, most definitely.
And the 2 orbiters, of course, transmitted thousands, tens of thousands of images back. 7 years after Apollo 11. It really was quite the golden age of exploration there in the early 70s. It just installed. Folks, you're listening to York Universe, the weekly broadcast of astronomy and astrophysics out of the Allan Carswell Observatory. Connor, Satish, myself, Paul, keeping you company this evening. By all means, point your favorite web browser to observatory.info.yorku.ca. Follow the links to online public viewing and join the chat. Speaking of the Observatory team, of course, they are at it again on Wednesday evenings on YouTube, starting at 7:30 local Toronto time, so that's 7:30 Eastern time. You'll have the opportunity to tune them in, listen to a topic of their choosing. They go into it in great detail while showing 1-meter imagery if the skies are clear, and of course there's Q&A opportunities available as well. So that's every Wednesday evening, 7:30 Eastern time on YouTube. A reminder for those of you who are keeping up with the excitement of space tourism, you'll all recall weekend before last, July 11th, Richard Branson, Virgin Galactic, VSS Unity, and the 6-person flight to the edge of space, suborbital, rip-roaring success, really great stuff. And now, round 2. Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin takes flight tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock Eastern. That's 1300 Universal Coordinated Time, so 1 p.m. Universal Coordinated Time tomorrow tune in the Blue Origin website for live commentary. The new Shepard vehicle will launch, hopefully, in and around 9 o'clock. It'll look much more like a rocket launch rather than Virgin Galactic's much more like an aircraft taking off. And there are 4 folks who will be flying to the edge of space. And as Blue Origin loves to point out, they're going to fly higher than Richard Branson and Virgin Galactic. They're going to exceed the 100-kilometer limit, but about the same length of weightlessness, about 3 to 4 minutes. An 11-minute flight altogether, with the capsule coming back under parachute. And of those 4 folks who are on board the Blue Origin flight, one of them is one of the fabled Mercury 13 women astronauts, Wally Funk. So she was not selected by NASA because they weren't allowed to do that sort of thing back in the 60s, but she nonetheless met the astronaut criteria, just like the 7 Mercury astronauts, the right stuff folks, but she never flew. Well, a bit of a consolation prize. 60 years later, she will join Jeff Bezos and his brother Mark and a 4th member who is studying physics in the Netherlands in September. Yes, he's 18 years old, Oliver Deemore. But yeah, Wally Funk, 82, the oldest astronaut to fly into low Earth orbit tomorrow. So tune it in, Blue Origin's flight tomorrow morning. Okay, gentlemen, we have 2 news stories to cover this evening. Connor, do you want to lead us off?
Sure. So our first news item is that the Hubble Space Telescope has been returned to operational status. The 31-year-old telescope had been in safe mode since June 13th, when its primary payload computer encountered an error that prevented data from being written into memory. On July 14th, diagnostics indicated the likely culprit was the telescope's power control unit, or PCU, which ensures that the payload computer receives a constant 5-volt power. This failure indicated that either the voltage leaving the power regulator was beyond the allowable limit, or that the PCU's secondary protection circuit became stuck on inhibit mode due to age. A similar failure had actually occurred in 2008, but that caused much less concern at the time, as the shuttle program was still operational, allowing astronauts to fly up and replace the telescope's Science Instrument Command and Data Handling Unit. Obviously, now that the shuttle has been retired, if the problem could not be fixed from the ground, then it simply would not be fixed at all. However, because NASA was unable to reset the PCU from the ground, Hubble is now running off of its backup systems. And actually, as of earlier today, the famed Space Telescope is now back in full operation, returning its first images of a pair of colliding galaxies, as well as aurorae on Jupiter.
Whichever way you want to cut it, the Hubble Space Telescope has been astronomy's discovery machine for such a long time. And, hats off to all of the mission controllers who worked hard on this problem to restore Hubble. The computer systems on board, some of them are literally, close to 30 years old. And that's not bad.
Yeah, I continue to maintain that if any satellite deserves a better ultimate fate than being disintegrated in the atmosphere, it is Hubble.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. To be able to go up and bring Hubble back and put it at the Smithsonian, that would be, to me, fabulous. There are no real plans to do that. I mean, it's a big telescope, and the space shuttle was able to take it up, but even the space shuttle was likely not going to be able to bring it down. Even if we had the space shuttle running now, to land the vehicle with that much in the payload bay was NASA basically said that they didn't want to ever try it. The payload bay often came back basically empty. And the flight characteristics of the shuttle, it basically was a falling stone for a glider when it was coming back. To bring the Hubble back was always considered to be undoable. So we need a new vehicle if we're going to keep Hubble safe, or we have to be able to strap a booster onto it at some point to raise its orbit. But I'm with you, Connor. I would hate to see Hubble finally deorbited and splashed into the South Pacific. That, to me, would be a very, very sad end to a venerable telescope.
I mean, talking like a layman, it sounds absolutely weird to me that they wouldn't make an attempt to actually bring it back properly, given that fact that you now have billionaires in that game also. So I'm like just seconding what you just said, but like I said, from a layman's perspective also.
Yeah, I mean, it's hopefully got, quite a few years left in its life. So maybe by the time that the end of its life comes around, we will have found out some way to bring it back. Time will tell.
Yeah. Not beyond the realm of possibility, to be sure. But it's certainly not obvious how they will be able to bring it back at the moment. But just speaking from its science perspective, 2009 was the last time that the shuttle was up there, and they just about replaced everything except the mirror. I mean, the computers were refurbished, new science instrumentation was put on board, and so on and so forth. The reaction control wheels that allow us to point Hubble, everything was replaced, and during the earlier missions they replaced the solar panels. So this telescope just about was brand new in 2009, and we've had 12 years of pretty flawless operation. This last problem that Connor just was describing was by far the most serious that has happened since 2009. If the backup systems last as long as the primary systems, then we could hope for another 10 years or more of continued operation. And even though the James Webb Telescope is likely to launch later this year, it really isn't a replacement to Hubble. The James Webb Telescope is optimized in the infrared, and while you can sort of take images that you would recognize with the James Webb, the Hubble telescope is optimized in the optical region. So James Webb is not really a replacement. So hopefully the budgets will stretch and James Webb and Hubble can be maintained for many years to come, and the sort of glitches that we've solved over the last month will continue to be solved. So fingers crossed, astronomy's discovery machine lives on.
I also have another comment, again a wise comment, is that the fact that the mirrors were not changed, that shows us that mirrors actually never go redundant. Technology does.
That's true. That's exactly true. And the York Observatory's 60-centimeter telescope is a great example of that.
Absolutely.
The optical system hasn't changed since '68. Every electronic component associated with that telescope has, and some of it's been changed out 2 or 3 times. But the optical system, no, it lives on and on and on. All you have to do is be kind to it, re-illuminize it periodically, and your optical system really goes on and on.
Professor, you're the only person who can say be kind to it. For people like me, I'm like, be scared of it. Just don't even go near it. So.
Okay. Shadish, take us into wow territory.
Absolutely, and I'm at a little bit of loss here. I think this is the news now because of the Perseverance rover, or I'm not sure why this is in news as of today, but I will talk about it anyway. So the WOW signal is a radio signal at 1420 megahertz that lasted 72 seconds, and it was detected at the Ohio State telescope on the 15th of August 1977 using the Big Ear telescope, which is a part of the SETI project. SETI is for aliens, like alien life. I wouldn't get into the acronym completely. The signal was so strong that astronomer Jerry Emin circled it in red and wrote "wow" in a lovely penmanship in the margin, hence the name. There are many explanations to suggest over the years, but most of them have been ruled out. The most popular explanation among a certain subset of the population that it was aliens. So a team led by Antonio Paris at the Center of the Planetary Science has found a very strong candidate for the source of the signal, saying it was or it is, comets. The wow signal originated in the area of the Chi-Sagittary. That's two comets that had yet to be discovered that were in the area of the sky at the time. So 266P or Christensen, which is the normal name, and then P2008 or Y2 Gibbs, which is again the normal name. So these comets have large clouds of hydrogen around them, and hydrogen has a radio signal at 1420 megahertz. So Paris's team studied the comets in late 2016 and 17 and found that signals detected were similar to the wow signal, especially the ones from Christensen. So we cannot say for sure if the comet was 266P, but the team concluded that a comet was a very likely cause for the signal. So a spokesperson from the OSU Radio Observatory, however, is skeptical of the results, stating that the comets in question would have been too far away in 1977 to have caused the signal. So we're still listening, and let's keep listening.
Yeah, the wow signal is reputedly, the most likely ET signal we have ever received. That's not necessarily, it's a debatable point, but it has received the greatest airplay, shall we say. And this cometary theory has been around for quite a while. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure why it's getting a new lease on life. But certainly, the wow signal generates lots of excitement, because it wasn't just a quick blip. It was, as you said, Satish, something like 70 seconds worth of reception. So that's not just a quick momentary blip where you go, oh, okay, well, maybe you just passed across a quick satellite. 70 seconds of serious signal is not to be scoffed at, but they, like all other ET type signals, could never repeat it.
Well, maybe, okay, but
well, regardless of the direction that it was coming from and so on, you always hope that we can hear it more than once, so to speak. But
so if it was supposed to be a repetitive signal, then probably one of these theories could have made sense.
Well, more sense at any rate.
Yeah.
I mean, when all is said and done, the signal has never really. You're always hoping to hear it more than once, shall we say? And this signal, like many other signals, was never heard from more than once, and hence you start looking for other possible explanations, which in this particular instance includes this notion that it was a comet. But whether or not it was the comet or not, really hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing which comes close was the LMG thing, like the Little Green Men thing, and then they did find out what the source was, and it was, of course, a pulsating signal. So, but the news that I'm reading is talking about probably Perseverance being in the news again because they're about to go to Europe, I think. Might be wrong here, but maybe that's the reason.
1 minute off.
It's coming on news again.
Yeah, the pulsar signal, of course, that we picked up in 1967, and of course the multiple pulsar signals thereafter, much easier to work with. But anyway, the wow signal has always generated a wonderful timeline, and people continue to love to talk about it. At any rate, folks, we've reached the top of the hour. You've been listening to York Universe, the weekly broadcast of astronomy and astrophysics out of the Allan Carswell Observatory here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Of course, it is Monday night, therefore it is Astronomy Night in Canada. Please stay tuned for Western Worlds, Quirks and Quarks, not to mention Science for the People. We will be back, of course, again next Monday evening. So until that point in time, good night from me.
We hope you enjoyed this program from AFM Radio, the broadcast service of Astronomy.fm. This program has been released under Creative Commons license. Please contact us for details. You may find more of our AFM original programs on our website. It's really easy to find us. We are astronomy.fm. You may also find us in the iTunes radio listings near the top of the News Talk section, and also as an iTunes podcast selection. We'd love to hear your comments. Please email us at radio@astronomy.fm. Thanks so much for being part of the voice of astronomy around the world and across the known universe. This is astronomy.fm radio.
AFM.